Good afternoon. Thank you. It's nice to be responded to. Shannon, thank you very much. So, and it is still afternoon till 6, I guess. Is that the official time? Or in evening? I don't know. Welcome to the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. We are delighted to see a room filled. We were just talking how non-season, I guess we have droughts, don't we? So the opportunity to come together is really welcomed by everyone. I'm Roxy Jurdy, and I have the great privilege of being the president and CEO of the Community Foundation here. Some of my colleagues are here as well. Murray Devine is our project communications, what is your title? Manager. He's important. And Susie Bowie, who's our VP of Philanthropic Education and Marketing, and Laura Spencer, our CFO, was here, and hopefully you all saw her. But all of us welcome you here this evening. We love hosting events here, and we love doing them with Sarasota Magazine as well. But we truly are a home for philanthropy in our community, and we're really fortunate to work with so many folks that care so deeply about our community and really want to make a positive change in the lives of others. And they do that with their philanthropy through nonprofit partners. And all of you are here tonight because you care, whether you're a nonprofit, a donor, but it's truly all of us together that makes such a difference and for positive change in our community. Do we have any folks that are here for the first time? Oh, I love that. The reason I ask, you may not know, but we have 12,000 individuals that pass through these doors every single year. And that is because of Leila Gompertz, whose name is on the front of the building. She's a former board chair and a donor, and she felt this community deserved and needed a place where people could come together just for reasons like this. And what was important to her is, guess what the price tag is to be here tonight? $0. It's free. So we really like the fact that we can be a gathering spot for people to work together, to come together, to do really great things for our community, to learn, to do things just as this. So best of all, Leila gave us a grant to pay for this building, and she also set up a building endowment fund that helps pay for the maintenance of the building. I know the first time I walked in, I thought, this is too nice. What's the mortgage? What's the budget line item for that? So the fact she paid for it and we have an endowment is great. Last year, or the last 4 years, we are so proud. We've granted over $66 million back into the community, all because of donors who care about this community. So donors who have passed that have given us the responsibility of overseeing their intentions, or living donors who are doing their giving while they're living. But we're really proud of that great investment into our community. Each of you that are here tonight has so many wonderful stories about who your organizations are or who you are as an individual. So this branding tonight is going to be really special about how do you have a brand promise and you be true to that on who you are. So we're really looking forward to the powerhouse here. We love partnering with Sarasota Magazine. We do things such as this. Also, the Guide to Giving that will be coming out in September. It really is a wonderful opportunity to showcase those in the Giving Partner who have reviewed profiles. So we're looking forward to doing the Guide to Giving once again, as well as the Giving Challenge will be September 1st and 2nd. So I hope those of you are all excited for 24 hours of giving, and the brand promise and who you are will be so important to have a successful giving challenge. And think about the opportunity you'll be giving people, your supporters who love you, to support you, and how you communicate who you are will affirm why they want to support you as well. So I know you're all waiting for noon to happen on September 1st. We're looking for noon on September 2nd when it's over, but we really do like the opportunity. Susie's done a great job getting everybody prepared for that as well. So, and again, it's a way to drive people to your giving partner profiles, but more importantly, it's all about you all and who you are, what you do, and what people care about. So we're excited to be part of that as well. I am going to introduce Kelly Lavin, who is a force in this community. She truly is, and what you do, not only tonight, but for the community, and how the magazine supports the nonprofit sector is really important. So thank you so much for all that you do. And should I give you a microphone, or are you going to stand up? Kelly's had some issues with, is it your leg or your back? Both. And I have a broken wrist. So we're a great pair, don't you think, here? So there you go.
Two together, one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roxy. Sarasota Magazine and Biz 941, we are justifiably proud of our partnership with the Community Foundation of Sarasota. Yesterday, I received the most astounding piece of research that I think I've seen in a number of years. And this comes from a third-party audit, syndicated research that you two ladies will know. It's syndicated, it's called the Media Audit, and agencies all across the world use this to look at different patterns and behaviors. In Sarasota Magazine, like Atlanta Magazine, Chicago Magazine, Washingtonian Magazine, we're measured by them. They measured between February 2013 and February 2014, over 155,000 Sarasota Magazine readers gave $386 million. 1 year. 1 year. It's about $1,500 if you look at the average. So what you're seeing is a pattern of people who give. So if you want to find people who give, if they're giving, it's a good place to go. But it also speaks to what this community is. And what they measured, excuse me, I'm a little shaky because I'm on quite a lot of drugs, so I might as well just come out with it, you know. This includes not only all the nonprofits, educational, religious, political contributions as well. But still, that is an astounding number and one of the highest that you'll see in such a small market. And when you have a market, again, of Sarasota, in roughly about 500,000 is what they measure, when we're delivering almost half of that market, it's astounding. What we really see our role, and especially when I saw that number, I went, wow, is helping you connect with them. How do you connect with them? How do you talk with these people? We see them many times before you will. Many of them come, they buy their copies on the newsstand, and they're indicating that they're either going to move here or they're interested. We see the pattern all the time. They see it in the hotels. So what I decided to do today, last year we talked about how do you tell your story. I was really interested in how do you talk about your brand, because branding has changed so dramatically in the last couple years. Branding for a nonprofit used to be, well, it's all about fundraising, but I think you'll see today that it is much, much more. Our speakers, and being an enterpriser woman, I put the word out to all the women around and asked them who are the two best speakers I can find. And I ended up with two women whose names start with K and one with G. A third one, back there, Gigi. So, and amazingly, Kelly spells her name like I do with an extra E, so it was all like kismet. There you go. So our presenters today are Kelly Sims with KKS Marketing and Development. Kelly has 25 years of experience with educational, social, and health services nonprofit organizations. She now leads a consulting service practice. She works to increase funding and awareness for local nonprofits to maximize the invaluable services provided to our communities. And currently she's doing a really interesting project that she's working with the Tampa Innovation Alliance to develop an initial brand, marketing and public relations strategies, and a fund development campaign to launch the organization. The Tampa Bay Alliance was formed by the University of South Florida, Busch Gardens, Moffitt Cancer Center, and Florida Hospital to redevelop and revitalize the University North Tampa corridor. And Kelly has 3 kids that all start with a K. She does, yes. Kim McAllister. Kim is an executive leader and communications expert. She spent over 20 years with J. Walter Thompson, one of the largest advertising and marketing communication firms in the world. She served as CEO in Southeast Asia and on their global board of directors for 10 years. Among her many successes as a leader, she strategically repositioned the agency's business, diversifying its service operations to raise it to a top 5 ranking in the company. Kim is currently a partner at McAllister, Quimby and Associates, a consulting firm dedicated to helping entrepreneurs grow their businesses. Kim enjoys oil painting, cooking, beating the pants of her, well, that's not really right. Beating your husband on the tennis court. Yes. And she and Arthur, who's back there, moved recently, like 6 weeks ago, to Lakewood Ranch from Charleston, correct? Yeah. And then finally, Gigi Ortwine. She should be in the room. Gigi will be doing a really interesting toolkit at the end, a practical guide to your branding, your logo. Gigi is our creative director for Biz, Sarasota Magazine, and Venice Magazine. A note about the format, there is an outline so that you can follow along, take notes. Thank you for turning in all of your answers that helped the panelists kind of look and be able to form their comments. I appreciate you getting them all in. We will not be discussing your answers tonight, but we will have time for questions at the end. So, ladies, let's start. Uh-huh.
Oh, it's a great question.
That's a good question.
Come back to me when you have an answer.
You want to do Sarasota Magazine brand or nonprofit brand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sarasota Magazine nonprofit.
Sarasota Magazine nonprofit brand. Great.
Excellent.
Great. Okay. Kim and Kelly, why, I'm going to start with Kelly down there. Why is a brand important in the nonprofit sector?
Well, we know brand is important in both for-profit and nonprofit sector, but in the nonprofit sector, the experience portion of brand is so important, and that is our internal and external constituencies. What do they experience as they know us, and what is it that brings them to experience us in such a way that they want to be further involved or donate or volunteer with us in one way or another?
Is this different in the commercial sector?
Can I just add on to
Sure,
what Kelly
yeah.
just said? Because I think that the experience is a great chunk of this, but also, while Kelly mentioned earlier in her introductory comments that a lot of branding responsibilities were placed on donations, fundraising, that sort of thing, maybe looking for volunteers, but in today's world, to build a strong brand, it can actually achieve even more than that. Mm-hmm. And that's the exciting part, because to build a strong brand, to communicate who the organization is, what it does, and why it matters is really, really powerful. So building a strong brand, I'll be so bold as to say, can be empowering, can be liberating, and can be truly rewarding. So just wanted to throw that in.
Tell us about how you can influence people into perceiving your organization in a certain way. Either one of you.
I'll go first. Yeah. So I think first of all is to know yourself. If you know yourself, you have the best opportunity to communicate that and to shape perceptions about that among your various target audiences. And we'll come on to that whole target audience segment bit in a little bit. But branding is much more than a visual identity. It's really about a psychological construct that people hold in their heads. And those perceptions are formed in a variety of ways. It can be through experience with who you are. It can be through conversations with other people who may be familiar, or they can form it themselves. And so one of the keys to all of this is to be able to manage that, because otherwise your brand will be developed by the marketplace itself, and it will be defined in a way that may be not consistent with the way that you want it to be or the way that you need it to be in order to achieve what your organizational mission is really all about.
And I would add to that as well, the portion of knowing yourself as we look internally to say what are we about, what do we stand for. I would remind us to continue to ask externally as well in an ongoing systematic way, what is that people are remembering about us and know about us, because sometimes what we think that we're communicating from what is the conversations we have internally aren't always what it is we're perceived externally. So reminding ourselves to ask, and ask often, what it is people are remembering about us.
Well, then how do you influence, because you have different constituencies, how do you address them all in separate ways? Do you have how do you develop that one key message that is relevant to so many different audiences?
I think the first part of that is really to know your audience. And you will have a multiplicity of audiences just because there are so many people involved with the organization itself. So it could be employees, it could be volunteers, it could be your donor or supporter base, it could be your members, your followers, potential partners even. And so I think one of the keys to this in honing a message is really understanding what's in it for them. What do they need to know about you in order for this message to resonate? And this also is highly dependent upon, which of your audiences becomes paramount at a given point in time is really dependent upon what it is you are trying to accomplish strategically. So it may be that fundraising is your strategic imperative, and so your core audience then becomes donors and supporters. Or it may be that your mission is changing, and so strategically it becomes a wholly different sort of situation. Maybe partners become a more important constituency for you. So it really depends on what's happening with the maturation of your brand, with the current brand situation in the marketplace, however you choose to define that, relative to how you're going about really focusing in on who it is you're speaking to, because messages are different for all of the various audiences.
Yes, and one of the things I like to think about is in the nonprofit world, think of your brand in concentric circles, starting with internally. So think about those who work with us, our employees. What are they experiencing with our brand? First of all, for those of us with not massive budgets, that's going to be the brand ambassador first line, front line. And so begin thinking then of those concentric circles moving outward, those then beyond employees, volunteers, board, so on and so forth, and then moving out to those who know us least. That way, as we think about moving the message out and speaking to each audience, we realize what it is they know about us from the beginning.
I don't know which one of you mentioned it, or it could have been someone else, that even simple things, a very simple thing in starting every meeting that you have talking about what your brand is or your brand promise, so that when you start a meeting, whether it is with the development committee or the marketing people or your board or whatever, remind people what is your brand so that you always have that right in focus. Mm-hmm. And it's just simple things of repetition, so everybody is always on the same statement.
That's very true. And some of the organizations I've worked with recently, the idea of when you either realign or reposition or roll out your brand and your employees are involved from the beginning, your staff is involved from the beginning, think about a signing ceremony in which people can say, we're behind this, we believe in this, and put it on the wall. We've framed them and put them on the wall. Frame them on each desk, or make sure that the brand promise, for instance, that's possibly printed on the back of a card, on the business card, or it's actually printed on a separate card to be held by each of the people that are going out on behalf of your organization. And I completely agree that having it in front of you all the time provides also the opportunity for those of us who go out and to have some accountability to what it is those brand values are, so that we can be reminded how are we acting and speaking and what are we saying about the brand. So I would suggest that it starts as easy as actually posting it on the walls and carrying it in our hands.
Kelly and Kim, let's talk about the article that came from the Stanford Center for Innovation, and it was nonprofit, the idea framework. And Kelly, I think you're going to tell us more about that.
In preparing for our discussion today, we read together and researched and studied an article that was really the result of an 18-month study. It was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, in which they spoke to thousands of nonprofits, and from it, the author of the article came back and said that regardless of what people thought about brand and some of their skepticism about brand, there were 4 things that they were able to say they were very proud of with regard to their organization. They were proud of their mission. They were proud of the participatory process, the democracy within the organization. They were proud of the brand's values, and they were proud of the way that the organization got along with other nonprofits within around them within the community. And from that, then, they came up with the acronym IDEA, the brand idea. So brand I would be integrity, and that is, how is it that we internally and externally line up with our mission? Brand integrity. Then the brand D, which was democracy, had to do with that participatory process, and that is how free are our employees to communicate the brand? How much do they know it? And then how much do we allow them in their own way, whatever age or demographic they come from, to communicate that brand? E is brand ethics, and that has to do with how are we aligned with our actual values? What goes on behind the walls of the organization, does that reflect really what it is we reflect when we're outside of our walls? And then A has to do with affinity, brand affinity, and that is very different than the for-profit world. As a matter of fact, we're not about necessarily competing. I'd like to think we're not about competing. We're about cooperation. So what kind of a team player are we? The idea of affinity has to be, we know what our responsibility is and what our mission is, and yet we're willing then to refer to others or cooperate or agree that we'll work together. So brand idea came from that study. I did see today, by the way, that author went on in 2014, just last year, to write a book that is the brand idea. I would suggest that it might be something we'd all like to read. And she's changed the acronym just a little, but the idea of those 4 components I think are really kind of interesting.
I'll just add one thing to that, too, is that while there is definitely a difference in terms of branding and brand management between the nonprofit sector and the commercial sector, there is an inkling of competition, only from the standpoint of you are competing for people's time in the form of volunteers. They have an array of options to choose from in terms of where they spend their time. People have an array of options in terms of where they choose to direct their funding. So there's an element of competition in here for sure, but certainly not to the extent of what goes on the other side.
Kim, there's so much talk, particularly in the commercial sector, packaged goods, about brand engagement and all the ways that people can experience a brand, all the different audiences. Can you address how you form that relationship and how you look at the different points of contact?
So here we're talking about how to keep people engaged with the mission of your organization. And first it starts with connections. People hear about you, whether directly or indirectly. But in order for people to become engaged and actually become brand ambassadors of yours, there needs to be relationships built. And there are so many opportunities for that to happen in the way in which people come to interface with the brand, people come to interact with the brand, what those experiences are for people to be out and about personally, meeting people. And so the key element to all of this is consistency, because consistency really equals impact, and it also is an opportunity for the brand's values to be promoted in such a way that is consistent with what the brand is all about. And when those things are in alignment, then you have a really powerful situation. You have an opportunity for somebody to become truly engaged and enter into some action that you want them to do, whether it's contributing money, whether it's volunteering, whether it's simply being a brand advocate, whatever those things may be. So the ways in which you, your staff members, your board members, your volunteers interface with people become all important. What you want is consistency in terms of how all of that is happening and alignment with what your values are all about. So that depends upon the activities that you choose to put on, the programs you choose to support. All of those kinds of things become integral elements to having a very consistent brand engagement.
And I would add to that, I think I understood from Kelly that when you all were together not too long ago or this time last year, the topic was stories. And I'd suggest, you know, again, to reiterate the importance of stories and current stories, and also who tells the stories. So as we're engaging our different target audiences, I read a statistic today that talked about millennials who are many times more likely to volunteer when they are recruited by their peer versus management, leadership, someone older, whatever the case may be. It's perfectly logical. So as you think about that target audience, begin to say, you know, here's that message, that story we want to get across that might reflect something interesting to them, but be reminded who should tell the story as well. And I think that's it's really important to those of us who, again, I think that we're managing on not huge budgets, and so we're leveraging our stories a lot. So think a little bit about who's telling the story to each audience.
I think also the moment you forget who your customer is, you've essentially lost it, because humans are about what's in it for me. Mm-hmm. And if you forget that point, you've lost the connection and the story. And so no matter what you do, always recognize what's in it for the person you're talking to about what you're trying to get them to do. We've had really interesting discussions, Kelly and Kim, about keeping brands relevant, particularly brands that maybe like American Red Cross, where many of you in the room, like I did, grow up putting, you know, pennies into a box. But now American Red Cross may not be as relevant to a lot of the millennials or the younger. So let's talk about brand evolution. How do you keep a brand relevant?
So this goes to the fact that the world is obviously not static. Things happen, conditions change, and those things can be either internal or external. They can be controllable conditions or they can be uncontrollable conditions. So, for example, internally, maybe you're having a change of strategy. That has implications. Externally, maybe there are some incredibly seismic market shifts that are going to affect the situation. Another controllable, are you like the best kept secret in town? There are things that you can do about that. But then there are some attitudinal shifts that could be happening in the wider world out there that are uncontrollable. So, you know, one of the first things is, you know, what all's happening around you that may have an ability to impact the mission of your organization and the branding of your organization. And so how can you get a sense of that? How can you get a sense of, are things changing? Well, maybe it's time to conduct an analysis of perceptions out there. How are people thinking about the organization? Do they have the same, are they in sync with what it is your brand is trying to say, or are they not? Do they get a sense of what your mission is, or has there been some sort of mission drift and they think that you are what you were maybe 10 years ago type of thing? So there are perceptions that you can measure. There's alignment, obviously, in terms of what's happening internally so that you can get a sense of that. You could even institute some success metrics if you're that kind of organization that really wants to get a real hold on what's happening and measure things. So there are a variety of things that you can put into place to really gauge what is happening with the status of your brand and take some control over it accordingly.
Yes, and I think those of us who have been working in the nonprofit sector for many years, recognize that many, particularly social services nonprofits, began with an individual, someone who was really passionate about that, and the brand really became about that person. We know, most of us know many of them. I'm thinking of one where a sister who'd been in that organization for 40 years, and we recognize that many of those patriarchs and matriarchs of our industry are aging out. And so one of the things we have to take a look at is, was that brand developed around that personality? And so how do you, as part of the succession plan and as a part of that shift, you have to begin saying to yourself well in advance, what can we do about making sure that we're putting other ambassadors forward, that we're moving off of that individual? That passionate person was the greatest advocate for all those years, and yet becomes very difficult as an internal shift for us to say, now how do we brand beyond that individual? Sometimes people think the organization isn't going to go on without him or her. It's not the case, but get out in front of it. And I'd like to add one more thing with regard to the metrics, because I thought it was interesting as we looked at this again in preparation. Years ago, we recognized that brand was most measured by how much money we raised as a result of it. It was very external. But now boards, I think, are getting a little bit wiser about looking at some internal metrics as well. And that is, if our employees and the staff and the people working with us are well aligned and understand the brand, there are things that we can measure. For instance, it's statistically proven that there's less turnover in an organization where there's brand alignment. Also, as projects, programs, even potential grants come our way, the more aligned with the brand we are, the quicker we can gain consensus about whether we move forward into that next program. So yes, we can say unanimously or semi-unanimously, this aligns with our brand and we want to move into this. Or absolutely, it does not, and therefore we're moving on to the next thing. So think about some internal metrics with regard to measuring that as well.
Let's talk a little bit about brand communications, and we touched upon it briefly, but how and where do you tell your story?
Well, I believe in telling the story every time we get a chance, and I'm sure we all do. If we've been raising money as long as I have, you don't miss many opportunities for sure. I think one of the things I'd really ask that we think a lot about, and that is, in preparation, for instance, with our boards, the idea of what stories do they have to work with. I visualize this as, what does their tool belt look like? And so for many years, some of the boards that I work with, the first 5 or 7 minutes of a board meeting, I would bring in someone to actually, a client or someone we served, to actually tell their story. Obviously, it's going to be much more meaningful and impactful than the way I could tell it. And then that is just another tool that went in their tool belt, and they could find the right opportunity. So it's not just me telling the story, it's making sure that those around me have this tool belt of stories to tell, and then they're comfortable, they felt that emotion, that passion, that person that told the story, and they're comfortable telling it themselves.
One of the articles that we've all read too was such an interesting one, because they said large brands like Special K or Frosted Flakes, they have to make up their storytellers. They have to make up Tony the Tiger. They have to make up Green Giant. You guys don't. You have your spokespeople right there. So use them, because that is the one thing that connects people together. Stories, and they're real. They're not, Marie Callender or somebody. So let's talk a little bit more about the 2016 toolkit. What should be in it? Brand assessment.
Brand assessment, yeah. So if you could start 2016 understanding where your core target audiences are situated with regard to how they perceive your organization, that's a great starting point. So that's one thing.
But how do you do that? I mean, do you break segments out? Can you give some practical between the two of you about how do you do a brand assessment?
Yeah, it can be as grassroots as conducting focus groups or interviews with a cross segment of a particular group of interest. So it could be members of the organization, it could be employees, it could be volunteers, and what you're looking to do is just do a brief discussion with them to get a sense of if you ask that group of people, what is insert your name here all about, then you can get an array of answers that may be shocking, may be surprising, may be concerning to you. So it can be as simple as that. You could stretch that out beyond your immediate people who are associated with the organization. You could have conversations with the press, have conversations with your partners, just to get a sense of what, if you were to ask that very simple question, how would people answer it?
And I would say exactly, and I would say also, ask the question. I would have a few people ask the question if possible, so that someone's not couching that on behalf of the staff, for instance, on behalf of you. Maybe a board member also asks. And this is where bringing in someone to consult with you and maybe just completely objectively ask the question is very much worth it. And I can't say enough to systematically do that annually, at least, as a matter of fact, and starting with internal, and again, those concentric circles that I talked about, making sure that you're asking all the way out, because sometimes there's been a shift internally, and it takes a while for that ripple to make it out, but if you can catch that shift early on, then you're not mopping up something that's happening out here a little bit later. So again, I would say have a few people ask the question.
And make sure you're hitting all your audience segments. I'm thinking of Judy Bell with Neuro Challenge. You not only have people that you serve, or clients, you have the medical community, you have so many different constituencies that you have to ask to get full brand assessment. So make sure you understand all of your audiences. What are SMART goals?
SMART goals are, the acronym actually stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. They are goals that you would set for your organization on an annual basis. It could be even shorter than that depending on what your situation is. But the key to this really is you don't want something that's just sort of sitting out in the ether. I think we should try and accomplish this. It's much more effective if you actually quantify these. And at the end of the day, however often you're going to measure them, that you have a very objective assessment as to whether or not you are actually achieving them. So SMART goals.
Great. I would just add an anecdote on that. I've been following, and I'm sure you all have, giving us a story to think about with regard to a brand relaunch. You may have been aware about a year ago when our statewide organization, Workforce Alliance, created a new brand, which is now CareerSource Florida. And I happened to think of it today as I was driving in and past CareerSource Sarasota. I looked it up a few moments before we started, and they had their 1-year anniversary. And at face value, it's such an obvious thing. Which would you rather be, in the workforce, or would you rather have a career? I mean, it's just such a, it's just, to me, that I was very curious. And then there was a lot of other things that happened with that. But in that 1 year's time, they have exactly 2 times more employers coming to them, looking for employees, as well as 3 times more employees taking advantage of the fact that, wow, I'm going to go take advantage of the fact that they're going to help me not just become in the workforce, but they're going to be with me through my career. And I don't know a lot about that organization, but what an obvious and quick assessment of 1 year into a brand relaunch.
One word: career, workforce. It's amazing. High payoff activities. I kind of like that. What is it? What are they? I won't.
High payoff activities is basically about how are we going to spend our time. Are we going to spend our time in activities associated with our SMART goals that can actually move the agenda down the field, or are we going to rearrange the sock drawer? So there's a lot of times where you can, basically become very engaged in doing things that really don't have a high return. They may be pleasant to do, or they may be interesting to do, but at the end of the day, are they really advancing what the organization is here to do overall? So high payoff activities, to be able to sort of quantify what those are and how they fit in with the culture and with what it is the organization is trying to achieve is the concept.
And we know, working in nonprofits, we've had this dialogue that's been going on for the last many years about high payoff activities as it relates to events, for instance. And I know if you're a board member, you can kind of put your fingers in your ears right now, because it scares board members, I know, a lot to think about that gala that we've been doing for 20 years, and it's known in the community. It may have marginal revenue impact. It does, however, if we agree and we measure it and decide that that is the point of entry for many new people to get to know us and then move through what we call the behavioral change continuum, or in other words, move towards getting further involved with us. If that event is important from that perspective, then it is successful. But if it's just something we've been doing because that's how we entertain the people who support us, we might want to take a look at, from even a brand perspective, whether that is an important event on our behalf.
And there was an example, I think, that we were, actually, it's from someone in our community that was talking about why they don't do events. And they didn't feel it was appropriate because they were in food bank, maybe? Mm-hmm. I don't know, the food bank, to be doing something at the Ritz. So that is a brand decision. And that's a very one that obviously you need to have with your board, but it's about that brand experience, because every touch point impacts what people think about your brand. A brand is what's left when you leave the room, so you always have to remember that. Up-to-date online presence, and I have decided that people who do websites and coding actually own all of us, and that a website is never done, ever.
No.
So tell us, especially Kelly, I know you work with nonprofits, but I know, Kim, the whole online thing, I think you should tell us all that, yes, it is very difficult to do, and it will always break down first. So don't beat yourself because you don't have huge budgets. It's just the nature of the beast. But talk about online presence, please.
You want to go first?
Certainly, I think one of the things I try to be careful is to not start more than we can keep current. And it's really hard to press against the pressure that we have, social media, and now it's beyond Twitter. Do we have a LinkedIn group? Do we have a this? Do we have that? Just do a few things really well and really current, because we recognize when I pull up a website and it says that, buy tickets now for the event that happened last October, I'm immediately irritated. And so, and I'm sure a potential donor or potential someone who'd want to work with us would feel the same way. So if we can do one or two things and keep them current, I would definitely suggest that. And then the second thing I would say is this goes back to the idea of brand democracy. And it's an interesting change that's happened, because I was involved for many years when we created logos, and we've probably all had in our hand some kind of a guidelines and standards, and the logo could not be used unless it was this way and that way, and everything had to go through the brand police. And I actually was the brand police for a while, so that's like a pretty big deal. But and then social media sort of changed everything, because people that worked in our organization were going to be speaking on our behalf regardless. So in their personal lives, they were reflecting on us. And so whether we feel overly comfortable with the idea of that or not, it's probably time for us to accept it and agree then that it's time then to look at the employees and say, and look to those who work with us and say, what do they know about what our brand voice should be? So, and I actually brought this brand manual as an example, one we worked on 5 or 6 years ago. And so now it's not just about this is how the logo looks, but it's what is our brand personality? How do we speak? What is the voice in which we speak? So you have to take a look at it. And like you, I worked with an organization that one whole component of it was research. And so the voice could never be, it needed to be scientific. It needed to reflect that kind of, it needed to be able to speak that way. So even in social media, you couldn't get all like light. So you have to kind of say to yourself as well, look around within your organization, who can help you? They're going to be serving to speak the brand anyways. So make sure that they have all the information they need about that, and then consider giving them responsibilities with regard to those extra areas of social media or others that you don't have the ability yourself to manage.
Great. Gigi, are you in the room? Great. Gigi Ortwine, the creative director for Sarasota Magazine Biz in Venice. She is going to do a practical guide to communicating your awesomeness. Wow, that is some title. That's some brand, Gigi.
Hello, I am Gigi Ortwine, and I'm the creative director for Sarasota Magazine. Today I will be speaking about managing your brand, a practical guide to communicating your awesomeness. So, for many of you here, my presentation is going to seem kind of basic, but my presentation is brief and hopefully beneficial to those of you who are still honing your brand. So, what is your brand? Your brand is the personality of your organization and the way that personality is perceived by the public. Perceived is the operative word. That perception indicates the success or the lack of success of your branding effort. Today, I'm going to focus on one of those toolbox items that we were discussing that will help your organization to manage the success of your brand. A style guide, or a visual identity guide, or a brand guide, these terms are tossed around a lot. Different organizations use these words, sometimes correctly, sometimes interchangeably, but generally, the style guide or visual identity guide are subsets of your brand guide, but regardless of what you call it, make it your brand Bible, and make everyone within your organization familiar with it and accountable to it. I was in the back, so I couldn't quite see who was speaking, but someone mentioned today's social media and that every person within your organization is an ambassador of your brand. And that's why it's so important that the people within your organization are ultimately familiar with your brand message, because every tweet they make, every time they go to an event, they're an extension of your brand. Your brand guide should include, at the very least, a vision statement, a standardization for name usage. I was reading about that and I thought it was interesting. Take, for example, the YMCA, or the Y, no longer really refers to themselves as the Young Men's Christian Association. The way you use your name is vital. There shouldn't be confusion within your organization, because if there's confusion within your organization, certainly there's going to be confusion within the public perception. Key terms. Stepping away from the nonprofit sector for a moment, Disney does this better than anyone. Their customers are their guests, and their employees are their cast members. So terminology that you use, make sure that you're using it consistently and that all of the people within your organization are familiar with those terms, and again, use that consistently. Also vital in that brand guide, or in the brand guide, is logo standards, your color palette, and your use of typography. It can, however, be much more comprehensive It can include things such as a personality statement or tone. It can include templates for signage and advertising. It may include standards for the use of your photography and even interior design, and accepted uses of grammar and punctuation within your organization. Now, internally, your brand guide should be complete and thorough as possible. The more it covers and in the greater detail, the more unified your brand message is going to be. What you share externally should be brief and concise. It should be limited as it relates to its purpose. Your logo color palette and other graphic elements will commonly be shared with those that you contract with. So, be nice and share. Make your digital assets and style guide readily available. Whoever handles your marketing should have a folder that's immediately ready to send out to anybody who requests the information or the assets. Your logo, you should have a web-ready version, a JPEG, and, this is so important, a scalable EPS version of your logo. You should include a color and black and white version. The color version should be available as a Pantone color, a CMYK color, and even web color. Your guide should provide details on proper usage of your logo. This is what we use internally. This is our very basic logo style guide. You can see that it has the primary logo at the top, but then a secondary acceptable logo variation. It includes our Pantone colors and our process color breakdown. We've also listed the fonts that we use in our logo type and the fonts that we use editorially. And then at the bottom, there's the Don't Abuse Our Logo section, showing ways that we really would prefer not to see our logo reproduced. I did have a note on that B-Share about not sharing fonts. Fonts are copyrighted and cannot be passed on from one person to the next. So our style guide is a very basic style guide, but if you want to see some more extensive examples, a fabulous online style guide is brand.uber.com. It's interactive and it's very thorough, mostly addressing the visuals. Or if you Google YMCA brand guidelines, they have one of the most extensive and impressive guidelines that I've come across. So that concludes my presentation. I think that you got a copy of our style guide. If you have any questions or if you would like to replicate it, please feel free to. And if you have any questions, I will be available afterwards.
Stay here. Okay. Do we have questions for the panel? We have about 10 minutes to do questions for any of the three women. There's a microphone coming because they're videotaping. So, great. Dean?
Yeah, just curious. A lot of your volunteers and advisors to boards are from the for-profit side. When you talk about branding, do you think there's a big distinction between branding for for-profit and not-for-profit? And if it's relevant, what would be the most distinguishing?
I'll make a comment about that one first. The process is the same in terms of the thinking that goes into it, in terms of the headwork that needs to be done to do it properly. So the structure of it and the approach to it is the same. What may be different about it is the purpose. Could be also the multiplicity of audience segments on the nonprofit side versus the for-profit side. But I think to your specific question, Dean, while many board members may actually come from the for-profit side, to what extent do they know about the actual branding process? It really depends on where they came from. So I think it would just behoove the conversation to approach it from the standpoint initially as to here's what we're attempting to do and handle it from that standpoint.
Hi, I'm wondering, like, as you see brands over the years lose some of the wording, like Nike now is just the swoosh and we don't see the Nike as much. Do we want to, if we have a caricature or something that we use in our full name, do we want to single that out and make that caricature represent us, or do we always want to keep it with the name?
How much money do you have? Nike had a lot of money to get there.
Yeah. I really think that is a result of recognition. So I don't know that many of us in the room are going to be the place where our mark on its own, at least in the near term, would be recognized on its own. And Kelly's right. You know, a great deal of money went into that recognition. I think of the Target circle, for instance. We see that, we know immediately. So for those of us here, I would say that keeping our total intact mark with wording and all is probably pretty important.
This is somewhat of a related question. Obviously, this is all about getting our name out there, but is there a place and time and situation in which you want to be the best kept secret in town?
Well, you stumped the panel.
I'm thinking of that,
Regina,
it was Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books.
would you repeat that? Sorry.
In one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, he talked about marketing and how there was I think it was like a bar and restaurant that you had to get to through going through some dusty old storefront and walking through the back of a telephone booth, and how it created this amazing force of advertising, because the name of it was Please Don't Tell. And of course, the first thing everyone did was they told. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if you have some comments about that.
It's kind of an interesting supply and demand kind of tactic.
Yeah, it's got a shade of exclusivity to it too, as to why one might want to fly under the radar, to begin to build a buzz. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but I wonder whether it's the right kind of a concept in the nonprofit world. Do you have a?
No, I was just thinking of an example of maybe some foundations that are I really honestly think it's very few and far between. I can't think of really a good example right now. I do like the bar story, though.
Yeah.
You know, corollary for that in some ways maybe what's more grassroots versus a more formalized approach. And I think of the ALS Bucket Challenge, which they're going to try to do again, but to have it still be grassroots. So that your question triggered me, not a big fancy campaign behind it, but something that really gets a groundswell and it's more grassroots. And it seems that ALS Bucket Challenge is such a great example. Any thoughts on how year two, it's like they're going to do it again, but I think they raised, what, $115 million from that? Yeah. So I'm so curious how that groundswell, if it can happen. So perhaps that's somewhat behind your question too.
But then it began to generate a whole lot of Me Too's in it as well. And so then does it lose its specialness and yes, and originality, and even to repeat it again this year. I mean, it had a groundswell of support. It got all kinds of publicity. But what's next? You know, do you just repeat? It probably won't be as effective because people will say, well, I did that last year. Right. And I don't want to get another bucket of ice on my head again. So, you know, I think it's a real challenge in terms of how do you follow something like that up.
Is that where a brand assessment would come in? Would you be doing an assessment on something like that in your 2016 look ahead?
I think it would certainly be in the planning process in terms of, you know, what is our strategic agenda? Are we really trying to raise that much money again, or are we trying to do something different? And so it almost begins with a step back into what is it we're, you know, from an overall organizational standpoint, what is it that we need to accomplish in 2016, and what then are the tactics to be employed?
I would agree, and we would all admit that it was a phenomenon, that the idea of thinking you're going to recreate that is not likely. On the other hand, I'm sure they did do an assessment, and if they said to themselves, if we raised 20% of what we did the second time, even if it's not a great repeat, it's still more money than they had been raising. So there was probably some serious thought in that as well. I'm sure they're not just going like, oh gosh, let's do it again.
And probably also looking at how do they deepen that relationship, because you got a lot of people because of the notoriety and having it on the ice, but what happened to that money? What does the organization actually do? So going in on that opportunity to deepen the relationship with that first-time donor is really, to me, where the opportunity gap is.
Yeah, very good point.
So, any other questions at all? Hi. Kelly.
Kelly Romanoff with Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Ms. Lavin, I second your point that cultivation may come before doing a second ice bucket challenge. I'd be interested to know your current favorite nonprofit brand and why.
There's a lot of good ones.
There are a lot of good ones, yeah. I was kind of struck by, is it called the Girl Effect?
I'm not sure.
Yes, okay. I was struck by that one because of its originality relative to its approach. Its videos are done in a very simple fashion, but a very powerful and compelling fashion. And so it was more what struck me about it, and when I think about it, that one comes to mind mostly because it was so different. And if there is a way to be so different yet still relevant, then that is powerful.
I think my favorite now that I'm tracking an awful lot is Charity Water. And it has a lot to do with, they just came into the space. If you get a chance, look it up and watch some of the videos. Most everyone in the room is probably very familiar. But from the get-go, everything they did very differently. And they just decided that none of the norms or the way things were, and I cannot think of the founder's name right now, but the way that now people, you know, instead of having birthday parties, children are giving to, and they are taking it down into small bite-sized pieces so that fresh water can be brought into these you know, underdeveloped communities. And it's become, and then it sort of turned and became a very chic thing to do in certain communities. And so I'm really a big fan of that brand right now.
Great. Before we close, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about, again, our guide to giving.
Kelly.
Yes.
I have one more question. Sorry. Back here.
Oh, back there. Okay, sorry.
Hi, could you please comment on crowdfunding?
We're moving into it in a couple of different ways. I, in fact, recently tried something that was marginally successful. I'm really interested in it, and I think it's going to be an additional revenue source for many of us. I tried something that I worked really well, and you might think about doing this. If at the end of a major event that I had been involved with planning for a year, obviously that was a limited amount of folks that were in the room, 500 or 600 people. But then we launched that particular pledge ask out into crowdfunding at midnight that evening. And so then we had asked people to give through crowdfunding in the room, and then launch it that way out into grassroots, out into the community. And so I think, again, I'd go back to that warning we had for all of us earlier, and that is, let's don't do anything that we can't do well. And so if you have time to try it, and you can do a very small, I think initially it should be a small amount of money that you can raise so that you can show success and then move to something larger. I think I'm really interested in it, and I think it's something that we should probably all take a look at.
Giving Challenge is a good example.
Yes.
In some ways.
Roxy's saying the Giving Challenge, which is September 1st and 2nd this year. Great. Quick note about the Sarasota Magazine and Biz 941 new program this year for the Guide to Giving. This issue, which I can tell you we have 10 copies left. The Community Foundation, you distributed over 3,000 to new donors throughout. This was distributed all throughout the year. So it not only goes out in September, it is used with new movers, it's used with real estate agents, it's used with financial planners, and it is definitely taken, I can tell you, because we have 10 copies left. So there's information about participating in the Guide to Giving with stories of hope and also display ads. This year, we announced a new award called the Greater Good Awards. And this is through Biz 941 in a partnership, obviously, with Sarasota Magazine, because we're sister magazines. And it is to look at the corporate and business arena here who do so much for philanthropy. So we sent out, asked for nominees in 11 categories. We got over 250 nominees. I mean, and that was within about 10 days. So they have been narrowed down to 33. They all were through nominations. An independent judge panel of judges chose the final 11. And they will be featured in Biz 941 and at our event, in late September at the Ritz-Carlton. So there are sponsorships available for that. I mentioned this when we started, but I am so proud of this. This, to me, is why you go to work every day. That the readers of this magazine that Pam Daniel edits for 30, how many years? 23 or something, that they donate $386 million in 1 year. I mean, you just don't hear that. So again, if you're looking for an audience that needs to know about you, this is the audience. Finally, I did talk a little bit about Newsstand, and I'm going to tell this again because we are the only magazine that has significant Newsstand. We sell 5,800 copies in Newsstand in 4 months. That's where new movers come. That's where new donors come. So please remember that. And then finally, make sure you pick up information on the Guide to Giving. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, panelists. You all were terrific. Thank you, Community Foundation.